It's so nice to see everybody in this virtual room. We've been working really hard, I think, together for almost the past year. This is a group of people who've been collaborating in Chicago on a major project, right? The deployment of 100 air quality sensors, what we think is the largest ongoing real-time network collecting data in a North American city. I'm so excited to have the chance today to reflect with all of you about this work that we've done together and to talk about what we're doing next. But first, of course, for the audience, it would be great to do some introductions. So I thought we could just sort of each take a minute or two and sort of introduce yourself and your work and how you came to be so engaged in air quality sensing in Chicago. And so I thought I'd start, Charlie Catlett, with you. Given your experience in the Array of Things and at SAGE at University of Illinois Discovery Partners Institute, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to working in massive sensor deployments?
Sure. Charlie Catlett, I have been for the last 10 years or so looking for ways to address some of the challenges that cities like Chicago have as a computer scientist, applying computer science and computational sciences to those challenges in a way that's appropriate. And so many conversations with Raed and others in the city about how we might help with some of those challenges, one of which is persistent air quality issues in certain neighborhoods. And so we started doing urban sensing back in about 2012 or so and haven't stopped yet.
Terrific. Raed, maybe that's a natural transition since you've been collaborating on numerous projects with Charlie, as well as projects using cutting edge technologies across the spectrum from sensing to remote sensing. So could you tell us a little bit about your work?
Sure. My name is Raed Mansour. I'm Director of Innovation at the Chicago Department of Public Health. So we use a health equity lens to make transformational changes in public health practice. And one of them is applying emerging or advanced technologies to improve health. And we look for these opportunities. And yes, I've known Charlie for a while. And one of the things that got us to know each other was this Bloomberg Philanthropies Award that we partnered with some great folks at University of Chicago's Center for Spatial Data Science. And we were looking at novel ways to model air quality and bring it into the city. And also what you've done here as well, and what Charlie has worked on, is how to communicate it to the public. So I think there's the innovation too. It's we always look at that innovation with technology, but it can be a process program or communication that can make something like this more innovative.
Great. So that's maybe a natural transition to Tiffany, who's sort of front lines collaborating with communities in the deployment of low-cost sensors. So Tiffany, tell us a little bit about yourself and your work.
Yes, my name is Tiffany Werner, and I work at the Environmental Law and Policy Center as our community science organizer. My work has a lot to do with kind of connecting communities to the data collection process in hopes that that experience will encourage them to become advocates. Our project that we're working on in these communities and environmental justice spaces is for air quality monitoring. And so for the past 5 years, we've been working very closely with Chicago community groups to give them handheld sensors that allow them to assess what particulate matter levels are like as they're moving throughout their neighborhood, so we can find hotspot areas or areas that experience higher levels of pollution than others. So this sensor network was a very natural fit for me to kind of insert myself into the conversation because I have done so much work across the city. I was happy to kind of connect all of the work these individual communities are doing into one big project.
Yeah, I think that's some of the most fascinating insights we found in doing urban sensing research is that the lead users are, folks like Raed at the city and folks like the community scientists that you work with. So it's sort of a different group of people than we might conventionally be building tools for. So Meera, maybe can you talk a little bit about your role and how you reach and navigate these different spaces?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Mira Raja. I'm the Senior Manager of Solution Design and Program Development at City Tech Collaborative. And what we do at City Tech is we're an urban solutions accelerator, and our goal is really to be able to bring a lot of these diverse stakeholders together and think about solving complex urban challenges with sort of collaborative tech-enabled solutions. And my role is really around a lot of the stuff I lead is around how we bring that public voice into the development of a lot of these solutions, and how do we engage the residents around that. And so, especially in a space like the environment where, within cities in general, residents are really important, and then especially in a space like environment, where so residents can be empowered to understand what is happening, sort of adjacent to the kind of work that Tiffany was talking about doing.
Right, and it's been really fascinating to see with some of your work how much people want to work on environmental issues and just are looking for venues and channels. So Scott, why don't you introduce yourself and also give sort of the high-level overview of what we're sort of focused on in the project that we're all connected with.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, I'm Scott Counts. I'm at Microsoft Research. My background is in computational social science. We formed a research team called Urban Innovation specifically to focus on science and technology for cities. And really the mission is, that is we think just the place where we can try to work hard to tackle some of society's most pressing problems. And so with respect to environmental sensing, that's just a foundational piece of technology really to address issues around sustainability, around resilience, and around equity. And so, that's been this kind of first big effort from this research team, and it's just been wonderful to collaborate with all of these folks in Chicago to really make this a reality.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that leads us to sort of a first set of questions that I wanted to ask folks, which are really about the network that we've been building together. And so I thought I'd start with you, Tiffany. I'm curious, given, you've led mobile monitoring workshops for 4 summers, you've been deeply engaged in this work for a long time now. And so I'm curious about the gaps that you saw in the existing network and why you think, why you wanted to collaborate with Microsoft, why you wanted to work towards building this bigger network.
Yeah, thanks. So as mentioned, ELPC and our community partners, we work on educating communities and teaching them about what is in the air around them through outreach, data collection, and advocacy. We've been conducting mobile monitoring to get a better understanding of street-by-street particulate matter concentrations and one's exposure as they kind of move about their neighborhood. And this brings about a connection to your neighborhood and a sense of awareness that is very invaluable. But the data that it creates is pretty limited. And so in order to have enough actionable data through mobile monitoring to push for things like better policy, we would have to overwork, overextend, and overexhaust our volunteers and community partners. And so the gap has been in collecting data that is comparable to the EPA in both its sampling scale, but also quality. And so I see this new sensor network that Microsoft Research is doing and deploying as a way to address that gap. So now we're finally able to have those 24-hour samples across most of the areas in the city, which is huge because before we were kind of asking, is air quality poor in the West Side? And we would get our community partners and kind of street by street monitor and find some hot spots that highlighted kind of what our concerns were. But we can now shift that question to, is air quality worse on the West Side, and be able to have a data set that compares our communities that we're concerned about with other areas in the city. And so this network will have enough data to finally do that, and enough historic data to kind of point back to and highlight trends over time. And that's a huge piece that was missing.
So my next question is for you, Raed. These questions are as much social as they are technical. I think some of Tiffany's work highlights this sort of advocacy and education and awareness angle as much as sort of action. And we clearly need researchers to figure out how to calibrate the sensors and improve accuracy. And, we also need residents to figure out how the technologies need to be used. But I'm curious, just sort of from your perspective, how you're fostering collaborations and knowledge sharing, and how you're thinking about kind of moving forward on this work. I know you've started convening working groups. I know that you've sort of really been a leader in this space, and so I'd love to hear more about how you're thinking about using and bringing people together based on these platforms.
Yeah, and you're part of these networks now, and Charlie has been for a while, and bringing science and technology in this in an environmental health advisory working group doesn't happen overnight. The first piece is to create a space, I think. I didn't know where scientists and technologists hung out, so one of the early things we did about 8 years ago was we created like a GIS working group, and we just opened up, public health every Friday, once a month. People would come in and they would share. It was an open space where they can share their work. They can share whatever they wanted. We tried to have an agenda of a presentation, and that's transformed over COVID, where now we have this limitation of space, in person, but we can still come together. And I think it starts, that's one way to build trust with government and our partners, both civic tech, the community, different communities, but as scientists and technologists first, create a space, either create it or you join them, their space. And building that trust over time, it doesn't happen overnight. So I think one of the other things that we want to do is have an informal space, not to have like a very formal, too academic space. We can like really just speak our mind and our opinion without judgment, and help each other. And it has to be two-way. It can't be just me coming to you and asking, what are you going to do for me? It comes both ways. What can we also do for you? What can we help with? Can we serve as the pilot? And you've went through this, Madeleine, and Charlie too, for sure. The number of departments you have to work with. So it's hard being that outsider, but I think this makes it more comfortable for partnerships and collaborations. It doesn't have to be immediate, but it could be down the line.
It's so interesting to hear you talk about this sort of like the process of doing science and doing tech and doing innovation as a sort of relationship building process. I think we found over and over that like the first tool we show you is not the right tool, right? The first version of the website is nowhere near as useful to community scientists or academics as the third or fourth or fifth. And so this maybe leads into a question for Charlie, which is, you're on version 3 now, I think, if we're version 2, an array of things with version 1. So can you talk a little bit about, building these networks, learning from them over time and sort of getting better with every iteration, but also sort of how that lets you build relationships and build, social infrastructure to do these sorts of massive projects down the line?
Well, yeah, of course, the shortest answer is for urban sensing networks is water is your biggest adversary. Water wants to get into your devices. We started out with this goal of measuring the city to answer, or at least to provide data to help answer relevant questions about the city, challenges that residents had, that the city had, that scientists were looking to answer. And so when we learned that the city was going to be replacing 300,000 streetlights with LED lights, we said, could we maybe put a device up there when you're doing that? And before we could say what that device would do, we had all these workshops with science team groups and residents and people like Raed and others in the city, and asked them, what would you like to measure if we could put these up around the city? So that led to a list of things that included air quality, and one of the main things that it included was the need for a context of a measurement. If you get a spike in air pollution in some area, could you at least know what the traffic is like at the same time? So could you measure multiple things at the same time? If you're getting a high temperature, do you know if that's in a measurement that's made under an oak tree in a park versus in the middle of a concrete parking lot. And so that led us to putting processors out there at the edge to process the data in real time, including images and sound and light and air quality. So, over time, what's been exciting is that the processors that we have now available to us are so much faster and require less power, as do communications devices. And so we can begin to think about using AI inside the device to make the data better, to make up for some of the challenges that we have that remain, which are low cost and high quality air quality sensors, for example.
Do you think that these advances are enough that we're finally at a point where we really will have, the smart cities that people have been promising for decades, or are there still big gaps in the pipeline?
Well, everyone has their own idea of what a smart city is. To me, we always thought of what we were doing as a sort of a Fitbit or fitness tracker for the city, and one that we envisioned and we really aspired for that to be something that was a partnership with people in neighborhoods and residents, and not something the city was or we were imposing on them. So I do still think that there are some challenges opportunities, challenges that we want to address with respect to how much we can learn about an environment in a way that respects privacy and yet takes advantage of AI and new technologies. And it's true, we would love to have really cheap, really accurate air quality sensors. However, in the last 5 years, what we've seen is we've gone from, almost random number generators. Some of the sensors were not really very good, to what we have in this project here are, these are not the kind of sensors that you might set a policy or impose a fine based on the readings of these sensors. But like the one I have in my office here and in my house, they can tell me qualitatively what the air quality is like. And I don't really care if it's, if the particulate matter is, in the 400 range, like on a bad day in Beijing. I don't need to know if it's 395 or 472. I just need to know, is it 300 or 400, right? So what we have now is super useful for a lot of what we really need to do, even though, in our first conversations with Raed and his team at the Department of Public Health, they recognize the shortfalls of the cheaper sensors, but they also said, but they tell us where we should look more deeply with maybe our more expensive gear.
Yeah, I mean, that's, such the struggle of this project. And maybe, Scott, I think that's kind of a question for you is this, once you get the data, then you have the question, right? You find a hotspot, and then you have to figure out why it's there, or you figure out that there's, a regular pattern or a trend or another issue. And then there's so many new questions that come up. And so I'm curious about how you're thinking about, okay, now we have a network. How do you build tools to use that network?
Yeah, super question. And I think that's maybe at the heart of what's so exciting about this work is the ability, just the opportunity actually to bring together such a multidisciplinary team of people. From our team at Microsoft Research, and then with these collaborations, it's been really illuminating and really fun actually to work with people with so many different sort of expertise. And so once you have the network, like you said, okay, we have the data. Now we need to take into account what Charlie was just saying about, okay, well, how reliable is it and everything, what can we claim, what can we deduce from the data? And so what we're thinking about is how do we convey it to different constituency groups? So, there's residents, there's academics, there's communities, there's the city itself, right? There's a bunch of different almost sort of levels of or types of constituency groups. How do you build experiences for people to work with the data that's meaningful to them? Right, that connects to them in a way that's really kind of meaningful, but is also valid statistically. And so that's a really key challenge that I think we're working on now that we have the data rolling in.
Yeah, Meera, I want to throw this to you because I think you very much exist in this space of bringing in these different collaborators, but also running the civic user testing, being at the sort of front end of things and interacting with users who then send us things back and don't understand them. And so I'm curious what your perspective is in terms of needs for translation and better understanding and collaboration.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, everything that Scott and Charlie and Raed said it entirely resonates with us, especially Scott, what you said about the need for it being accurate data, right? Like that is at the heart of this. You want to make sure that what you're collecting is relevant or is accurate and you're getting that correctly, but then also the users don't understand it or don't have a way to use it, then how does that work? And so with us focusing on residents, they're of course not the only stakeholder. And when we start, say at City Tech, when we start a lot of our projects, we do think very hard about who is that user group, who are the stakeholders, who are the diverse people we need to touch. But from the resident perspective, I think they're often dropped off as users. Like they don't hit that radar when you're developing things, right? I think this group is very unique where we all think about it, but sometimes there's too many other people to look at. But if we're building, especially a sensor network like this, which is, as Madeleine, as you said at the beginning, so many people we talk to are so excited about this space and don't know how to access that information. It's really opening up this avenue for just your ordinary resident to better understand what the air quality looks like in their neighborhood versus, a different place in the city and what to do about that. And so I think being able to bring those groups in and think about how do they utilize it and include that perspective in is really useful in thinking about how to translate the data to another group of people.
So something that I think was really important to us coming into this work was to make sure that we were building upon existing work, and especially to build upon rather than displacing existing work that community leaders were doing in the environmental justice space. I mentioned, the leaders in using low-cost sensing tools have been environmental justice leaders. And Tiffany, of course, the core part of that work was through our collaboration with you and with the Environmental Law and Policy Center. And so I was wondering if you could just kind of give a little bit of an overview of the work you did to support environmental justice groups and having a voice in this network, and why you think it's so important to center community voices going forward.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, Chicago has really dynamic community groups and leaders who have been incredibly vocal in air quality issues and environmental justice issues for years. And so when I heard about this project, I was really excited about it, and I thought it sounded like something that could really be beneficial for us and our communities, but noticed there was a lack of community voices at the table when we first met. And so I wanted to make sure that we were included in the work. And so these community leaders, they're not just speaking on behalf of an EJ community, they live in them. And so these areas are often industrial, within close proximities to pollution sources. And these groups have been continuing to fight historic pollution and incoming polluters that are stationary, like warehouses and metal shredding facilities, and mobile sources like diesel truck traffic. And so this effort kind of really helps to generate more data to both educate those community members, but also come up with advocacy solutions for cleaner and healthier air. And so kind of involving them in the process really allows us to figure out what areas are they most concerned about and how can we address that in this network. Because the bottom line is you can't really have a project that aims to address air pollution disparities or air quality disparities without involving those who are most affected. Otherwise, you end up with a data set that isn't super encompassing or is missing out on some of the biggest pollution areas that exist in a community, or you end up with a data set and tools that aren't useful to the communities who are going to be most utilizing them.
Yeah, I'm curious. I think we worked really hard to make sure that the priorities of environmental justice communities and leaders shaped where our sensors were located. I'm curious if you think that there's also room, now that we have the data, in analyzing and interpreting, like the sort of whole data science pipeline. Can you center communities the whole way through? Or is it just beginning and end?
No, I think one of the things that we have to keep in mind is we can't discount the interest of our community groups. And like I said, they've been kind of battling these air quality issues for a long time. And I often find that we as in anyone, any larger group who kind of relies on the work of a smaller neighborhood organization, is that we really use them for work in the beginning, but leave them out of the conversation throughout the duration of the project. And it leaves us feeling kind of used, like you needed us to do this, but you're not telling us what you're learning. So I think it's important, and what we've learned from the groups through our conversations is that they are very interested in figuring out what the data is saying as it's rolling in. They are really interested in figuring out ways to really connect with the youth. Is it through curriculum? Is it through art? Like, how can we reach our communities? So I think there's space for our communities in every single step of this process, which is great.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I could not be more excited to keep working going forward. I think so actually some of my research is on sort of this expertise from lived experience that often gets ignored or discounted, and I think Scott and I over and over have just been floored by how knowledgeable folks who live near air quality hazards are about their air quality hazards. There's just enormous lived experience and knowledge that is really valuable, and hopefully will shape our tools and our work for the better. So I did want to ask Raed, we have community scientists for whom we're making tools. We have general residents for whom we're making tools. And then we're also, making tools for the city and trying to make sure that these, things are actually actionable for the Department of Public Health. And a dashboard that serves the city can be so different from a website that's public facing or an API that's really for the civic tech community. Do you have thoughts about sort of whether and how to build tools for all these different audiences and how you walk that line?
Carefully. Interesting, because a lot of focus is on, identifying where the air is bad, but also in public health. We look at where air is still good because certain vulnerable populations are still impacted. And they're within or below the accepted thresholds. And so there is that experience still that I think there's a benefit for folks that it looks like they're having good air, but in public health, we take that data in and we start combining, and it shows, that there's still people that are affected. So how do we bridge that for the user, whatever the community is, and for scientists or government? I have this saying where you can develop wide so that any user can practice it or work with it as narrow as they want. And it is from an API, include it, whether it gets used by a handful of people or not, that's fine. Make it like a downloadable spreadsheet. That's okay. Or PDF. I know people cringe when they hear PDF. Or download the screenshot. Let it be available for however the user wants to access that information. And we did this with the Chicago Health Atlas 10 years ago, where it was developed for the people. And it turned out that a lot of researchers were just using it. And so, there was talk about how do we stop the researchers from using it? We're like, no, let's not stop the only audience you have. How do we add to it? And Meera, you might have been part of that second 2.0 version. Is there was API, Excel sheet, picture, improve the graphics, make it more communicable, make it easier, make the buttons into symbols, just a lot of user experience and user design in that. And so I like the interface that's now, the green leaf. It's very intuitive, and that's hard to capture in communication until, there's a trial and error that goes with that. So I think, don't run into developing for everyone in separate channels that just waste resources. So what you've done is this is for everyone who wants to use it, and it improves and increases access to each of those communities.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also, the smallest yet most meaningful way you can build trust is when somebody tells you they can't use your website to fix it. Yeah, Charlie, do you have thoughts on that? I know you've made Array of Things data available in every format possible.
Well, yes, at some level, was really thinking about what Tiffany said earlier, because many of our projects, and we came into this, early in the game. We didn't have these air quality sensors that you could put outside, so we're kind of starting from scratch. And so we did go to the neighborhoods and had community meetings and different engagements with other groups in the city. But then we got busy building the device itself, and because it was a research project, and so while the data is available, it's you sort of have to have 300 gigabytes of disk space to get it on to do anything with it, and so while we did push the envelope on the R&D and the mechanics of getting things out into a city, the kind of partnerships that you have to build over time, our data wasn't legible like this project here. And so in a sense, if you're sitting in a neighborhood, you're going, okay, well, we bought into this idea that you would partner with us and measure our neighborhood for us, but where's the tool or the website I can go to? Not where's the CSV file that's, tarball, because you've never heard of a tarball, right? And so I think now, this is one of the things that really attracted me to this project here. And that is that there was as much emphasis on legibility of the data as there was on the devices. So I think that's exciting about this project here.
Yeah, we've been really fortunate to have Asta Roseway, who's a principal research designer whose work and research and expertise is really in developing experiences for and with communities, which has been remarkable. I'm curious, Scott, I think about this as sort of aligned with so much of what Microsoft is doing and sort of, no code, low code experiences and, point and click machine learning tools and these sorts of things that sort of before I joined Microsoft, I thought of empowering everyone to do more as sort of a logo. And now I'm thinking like, how can I get, the head of Little Village Environmental Justice Organization to point and click a machine learning model with me? So I'm curious if you see that as, is there a future where, in addition to PowerPoint and Excel, everybody has, the ability to point and click and analyze their local air quality data on their computer?
Yeah, I love it, especially the focus on communities, this kind of community-driven innovation, which no question is for me, have been a real takeaway already from this project. And so when you imagine, how can we provide tools to enable folks to really get insight out of these data. And that's not trivial. Like we've been saying, you end up with a PDF or a spreadsheet or something like that, and there's actually a journey before you get to some meaningful piece of information. And so how can we just help guide that process, but build the tools to help guide the process in a way that's informed by what people actually say they want to do with these data, right? Because there's a million ways you could build it, and so let's make sure we're really informed as best as we possibly can be in terms of how we build it.
Right. Yeah. When there's a million ways you could build it, maybe you shouldn't be the one determining exactly what gets built. So I did want to kind of take a step back. I mean, we all worked on this project through a pandemic, and so I did want to take a step back and just reflect a little bit on some of the barriers, especially of working, in Chicago, putting in a massive sensor system in the midst of a pandemic. And of course, Raed, you're a Department of Public Health employee. You were at the center of things. I imagine this must have been the busiest year of your life. And so I'm just curious about, making space and time to continue collaborating with technologists and to continue building these innovative, to continue focusing on the future when there are always present crises that are so pressing.
Yeah, and it doesn't end. So yeah, I was detailed to be the public health tech supervisor for the pandemic, and relying on past experiences, of course, is very helpful. And I recall reaching out to Charlie a couple of times, and we talked about some projects, and that relationship is key. But it can be daunting when that pandemic hit. And I don't know if word got out that I was supervising this or it was just a natural extension to want to help, but my inbox and calls just flooded. I want to help, and it was a lot of folks. And that was just heartwarming and thoughtful, and I very appreciated this outpouring of support. But it also became daunting for my inbox, where I had to filter through what I needed to answer and get done with. But I didn't want to fall into the trap of the shiny object. There was a lot of pitching from folks that I didn't know. Like, you need this app. You do contact tracing on a phone. I was like, you cannot do contact tracing on a phone because there's a lot of details to type. I can't imagine, 8 hours of a contact tracer on a phone. So I did rely on that network because I got to, have that honest talk. What do you think? Is this worth the time? But also help filter through all that noise for that signal, because what we wanted to do was, ensure that we're addressing the vulnerable populations and not just chasing, this cool technology that happened during a pandemic. We were tasked specifically to help bring this technology together so that our workforce and volunteers and community organizations can use our tools. So that extended out. So we had to be thoughtful, but existing relationships and created some new ones during the process. And because we had a suite of innovations internally, we didn't start from scratch. So we were able to learn from our mistakes. I know that's hard to hear from government, that you're not allowed to make any mistakes, but that's how we learn. And I'm sure the same is true for research, Charlie and Mira, in work, and at Tiffany and everything you do at Microsoft, that there is an iteration. You make a mistake and you pivot. You make a mistake, you learn from it, and then you keep, going forward. You're not offered that much leeway during a pandemic. So we had to bank on our experience and hope, we can forge forward with a good version 1.0 that can be improved after we finish.
I should just mention that some of those conversations, maybe all of those conversations between you and I, Raed, took place on weekends or evenings. And the fact that my phone would ring on a Saturday afternoon, it would be Raed, and we would talk. It sort of reinforces what I've told people from other cities, which is there's this real symbiosis that you can build between the research community, whether that's a Microsoft research or a University of Illinois, university research, and the residents of a city and decision makers in city government, where we can find these common challenges that we have, like air quality that we're doing here. And where you have those, there's this thing that's happening where, in a sense, the community and the city are getting free research. But what the researchers are getting is something that, we're not getting funding from the city, but we're getting something in some sense that's a prerequisite to getting funding anywhere, which is we're working on a relevant problem. And we don't necessarily know those relevant problems sitting on a university campus or at, a Microsoft research campus, unless we have those relationships with people in the city. So this kind of symbiosis, I think, is what allows projects like this to happen even during a pandemic.
I'd actually, if it's okay, love to jump in on that as well, just based on some of the feedback that we heard that was fascinating. So if you imagine, if you remember what happened before the pandemic, right before the pandemic, was there were a lot of wildfires going on as well. And so what we heard from the community was actually people were already a little bit hyper aware of air quality, just based on some of the national events that were happening before. And then with the pandemic, everyone was actually staying hyperlocal. And so it was a time where people were starting to think about, they were interested in it, and they were seeing more and more right directly, locally within their community, what was happening with air quality. They were thinking about it even within their house, which I know is not exactly what this is addressing, but just starting to build that awareness and really wanting to understand a little bit better. And so it was really interesting to see how that paralleled some of the things that Raed and Charlie, you both were talking about that Microsoft was thinking about, and how it was almost with everything else that was going on, just an incredible opportunistic time to think about all of these things.
And that's so interesting, just to think about. We're so used to getting, even if you live in Chicago, you might still read the New York Times. I live in Seattle, and I still read these kinds of national press publications that don't produce any hyper-local information about my home or my neighborhood. And it's really interesting to think about, what we've all learned in the last 2 years is, you can get an update email every day from your neighborhood about COVID rates next door. And what that could look like for all sorts of environmental exposures or all sorts of important things. I think, it requires enormous infrastructure. It requires all of us to build all sorts of things, but it feels like we're headed exactly in that direction. So I'm curious, Tiffany, you and I, of course, early in the project met with community groups who had just come out of the pandemic winter. And so they were already operating on small budgets, already thinly stretched. I think Charlie and Raed just talked about sort of, this amazing collaboration between city and researchers, where the city wasn't necessarily funding researchers, but there's access, there's all this thing, other ways to do more rigorous and relevant research because you're collaborating. But I'm curious, with communities, they can't really apply to NSF. They can apply to EPA, thank goodness. But I'm curious about sort of lessons or things that you think folks need to keep in mind when collaborating with community-based organizations who are sort of resource-strapped, who are operating on thin budgets, how to do that in a way that's just and respectful of people's constraints.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will scream this from the rooftops all day, every day, if people ask. But as mentioned, our community groups have been working incredibly hard on these issues for years. And so a lot of our work and a lot of other organizations, such as this huge project that we're all doing, really relies heavily on community involvement and community engagement. And so when you look at Chicago and you look at our community areas that were the most hard hit with COVID, those also happen to be where our most vocal and our biggest advocates for clean air are, unfortunately, in these EJ areas. And so you have them kind of changing up the way that they work, possibly laying people off, and also dealing with adding more programming to their organization so that they can address community needs, such as access to food, childcare, all of these other things, which they may not have really had to focus on in the past. And so when I think about community work, the thing that sticks out the most to me, which you pointed out, is access to funding. Community groups, most of them operate on very small budgets, which is really unfortunate. And we have larger organizations that kind of really take up the grant space by having these well-written grants that talk about how they're going to kind of work with these BIPOC communities and do all of these great things. And then our Black, Indigenous, people of color communities are like, oh, we'll help you with the work, but we get nothing in return. And so it's kind of this issue that has lasted for years. And so when it comes to like what people should keep in mind with working with communities is that we are experts. We know where the hotspots are. We know how to get the people that are needed for engagement and for feedback, and we should be treated as such, and we should be compensated as such. And one of the best things I think about this Microsoft opportunity is we had the ability to set aside some small grants for our community partners. And I was very kind of persistent about that from the beginning. So I really do appreciate your willingness to kind of hear me out and understand why this was important. Because I think it's time that larger groups and groups that rely on voices of the community acknowledge that we are experts and start treating us as such.
Yeah, thank you. And I will say that was funded by an internal sustainability grant here at Microsoft. And so I think that was a case of taking environmental justice principles seriously. So I hope that we're able to really build on that going forward. So we've got just a couple of minutes left. And so I just wanted to ask sort of we've undertaken this huge effort. We've built a massive amount of physical infrastructure, right? The sensors. And I think also research infrastructures, we've got, an API coming soon. We've got all sorts of tools coming down the line. We're hoping for, all sorts of interested researchers to build things with these data. And then I think also, social infrastructure, right? I think what Raed and Charlie and Tiffany and Meera, what you've all been talking about are that these, sort of beyond the sensors, these relationships and trust that we build enable us to do these multidisciplinary, multi-sectoral projects going forward. So I'm just curious from each of you, sort of what is it that you're most excited to do with all this infrastructure now that it exists? And so I think I'll start, Charlie, with you. Do you have sort of particular things?
Yeah, as excited as I was about the legibility of the data for this project, the first thing that I got excited about was a couple of new things about these devices that we've been wanting for a long time. So most of the air quality devices that you can buy assume that you have an internet connected Wi-Fi, which assumes you're going to put it near someone's Wi-Fi, not out on a bus shelter. So the fact that these talk cellular connectivity was really important for really being able to get them out there, not just because you need Wi-Fi, but because, let's face it, these devices that you're supposed to connect to your Wi-Fi are not very easy to connect. And so you sort of have a level of expertise or luck that's required to get one of these commercial air quality sensors to talk to your Wi-Fi network. The other is that these are battery powered, so we don't have to run a wire out there. And so this fact that they're untethered really, and that they're low cost means that we can start to do things that we couldn't do even 5 years ago, or we couldn't do today with the typical commercial devices. Put them in places where people they can't afford Wi-Fi internet. Put them in places where people don't live, like out on a bus shelter where you would otherwise have to plug them in. So, this was how Array of Things got started. We wanted to be able to put things out into the city, and so it opens the possibility not just for Chicago for putting these devices out in places that were not going to be easy to get to, but also for larger, let's say, cohort studies, right? Where you can mail this in a padded envelope and say, put it on your porch.
Absolutely. I do want to make sure everybody gets a chance to speak before we have to go here. So Meera, and then Tiffany, and Scott and Raed, do you also have things that you're particularly excited about?
Yeah, I think definitely some of the stuff that Charlie said at the very end as we were talking to people, we asked them, where else would you want to see this? How would you engage? And they had all sorts of different responses: parks, grocery store lines, any place where you have a phone, you're sort of standing around for a while and you're able to engage. They were excited. And in that, wrapped up in that idea is this idea of access. So we had, when we were talking to people, I think Madeleine, you mentioned this, 95% of people were I'm very excited about understanding better air quality. This is really important to me. And to be able to give people access to that information, I would love to see how people are using it, right? What new ideas does that give people and the communities, and where do they want to advocate, and what do they want to do with that information? I'm really, really interested in seeing how that opens up people's, how that empowers our residents and our communities to do things about this.
Yeah, I think I'm most excited about the kind of, you have the storm clouds kind of moving and you can see a clear path moving forward, which is we're getting closer to be able to make some change or do something very impactful for our communities, I think. And that it's still a ways away, but this is a huge start. And our communities kind of really deserve us to investigate these air quality issues that they've been kind of talking about and showing us over the years. And we now have the ability to, and the data set to actually say, okay, we can sit down and we can look at air quality, and this infrastructure is a huge first step to that. And so I really look forward to continuing our research and figuring out how we can do something for Chicago and wherever else you guys decide to go next. But yeah, I'm really excited.
I have two real quick. One of them that this provides, this existing infrastructure can provide an opportunity to study policy efficiency. So if over time you can look at these trends, and here's when a policy is enacted and we're using these sensors, and then we can look 1, 2, 3 years down the road and see if there was a change. As was stated earlier, we're not looking at compliance and enforcement, but we are looking at trends. And, you can set an upper threshold, but, a company will meet that. And so, what are the policies in which we can start having this downward trend? That's the policy point. The other one is, like, how do we, and Mira brought up, really tear down barriers of access to this information. And I've always wondered, can we move away from a computer or a phone or a laptop or the QR code in a website, and can it be visual? Is it on the bus stop? I don't want to add more red light, red, yellow, green near a stoplight, right? But there's some way that can be done visually to say air is good here right now. It's in real time, and maybe it's piloted in a park, but that's my mind already taking over your project. So I'll wait till you guys are done.
It's our project, Raed. It's ours together. Scott, any last words?
Oh, sure. Just briefly, I guess I would say more or less what Tiffany and Raed were just saying, which is I'm super excited to be able to sort of work backwards, if you will, from the goals of the city, from the goals of community groups. So when the city is looking to, enact policy around climate equity, how can we best inform how that should actually happen? When community groups are looking to advocate, how can we best provide tools and data to help them do that? So I think, it's back to that research process and just making it as valuable as possible.
Great. Well, I'm looking forward to continuing working towards that goal with all of you. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.